Thank you so much, Emily, for making this happen, for inviting me to be here, and to all the folks at the Oakland History Center who were extremely helpful when I started researching this book when I was in graduate school back in the mid-2010s. At the time, the head librarian of the Oakland History Center, Dorothy Lazard, was there and was really a rock and stalwart for me, so it's wonderful to have you here tonight. Thank you. Always so many people to thank. Definitely Rickey, but I'll do that again later. And yes, thank you to Marcus Books so much for being here, and so please support them. And also there's several people here from UC Press who've been very, very helpful in getting this work into the world. So I think you're Jolene, right? And we've only been correspondent over email, but thank you to Jolene and Mallory and Helena, who are all here tonight as well. So I'm going to start us off with just reading a little segment, kind of drop us into the prose from the book, and hopefully give you a sense of the voice and the content, and then Ricky's going to grill me for a little while, and then you all get to grill me too, so it's going to be a lot of good fun, and then we'll celebrate and sign books afterwards. I promise you're going to know what this is about within about 15 seconds. The sound of screeching tires, sudden and startling, sent me speeding to the kitchen windows. Outside, in the intersection of 59th and Adeline Streets in North Oakland, I saw a car, modest and unremarkable, but for the fact that it was sliding sideways across the asphalt, spinning donuts. Its nose remained pinned in place as its rear swung around in wild circles, sending its weight careening to the curb like a centrifuge. I was riveted, caught between the excitement of this astonishing sight and concern that the driver would spin out and crash into my car parked nearby. Adeline, it seemed, was ideal for such a stunt. Until the middle of the 20th century, the Strip had carried a stream of streetcar commuters, including black workers from North Oakland and South Berkeley, to labor along the waterfront. But with the mechanization of the Port of Oakland in the 1960s, this over-wide transportation corridor, now emptied of both the streetcars and the commuters, became something of a relic. Around the time that I moved to that corner, in 2015, Oakland began to revamp the streetscape for the post-industrial era by replacing space for cars with bike lanes, changes that, according to the geographer John Stalin, served as both a sign and a vehicle for the neighborhood's gentrification. But it was the wideness and emptiness of Adeline that made it so attractive for spinning donuts. So now, mere weeks after the city repaved the street, this adept driver slipped into the intersection and began to spin. Then, just as suddenly as he appeared, he was gone. All that remained was the stench of smoldering rubber, thrill of uncertainty, and graffiti-like tire marks that redecorated the immaculate asphalt. These marks can be seen all over Oakland. Intersections, interstates, anywhere that an act of architectural grandeur or accident of urbanism imparted a space capacious enough for cars to circle up and dance. Seen from the air, these marks, which resemble the discs on a pair of turntables, inscribe a record of struggle over time, space, and race. The straight line, that deceptively simple sign of the quote-unquote march of progress, is one of the ordering ideas of capitalist and colonial time. In cities like Oakland, this sense of time is imposed onto the terrain of the street through stripes that striate currents of people and vehicles into segregated travel lanes. Within this structure, turns, crossings, and occupations are strictly regulated. But the marks imparted by a spinning car read like a residue of looping rather than linear time, each layer representing the accumulation of life energies reclaimed from the clock, the grid, the law. In this way, spinning donuts is similar to the DJ practice of the rewind, where the selector at a Jamaican sound system spins a popular record all the way back to its start and releases it again, again, and again to stoke the pleasure of the crowd. In the words of the DJ and music scholar Mark Campbell, this practice refuses the linearity of the song in response to the, quote, audience's insistence on enjoying the repetition of the track. Market time, he writes, is made to yield to the consciously extended moment of black joy. For the revelers who spin cars, not records, the street, like the song, is more than just a passage to move through. It's a place to loiter and linger, to congregate and play, to circle, not circulate, in ways that etch an alternative geometry of black life upon the asphalt. You probably drive straight ahead, says the rapper Too Short. We do it sideways.
say, if you haven't ingested the book yet, I think once you do, you'll realize that this book is like a vinyl record where everywhere you drop the needle, there's a groove that you're going to get into. Okay? It doesn't matter if it's talking about your grandparents' generation or your kids. There's something consistent throughout the whole thing. It manipulates, maneuvers through forms and structures of research, social science, literary, prose, all of the above. And so I'm honored to be here with Brother Alex Werth and get into this conversation. Okay, so having said that, I want to ask the first question from an outsider's point of view. And that is, what is this white dude doing coming in and telling all these secret stories of Oakland streets?
A fair question. Yeah, really fair question. Yeah, I mean, I think it feels really important to let you all know kind of where this project comes from.
I could have said, what is your positionality within the...
Oh, you don't have to do that. I'll do that, you know. Yeah, so I arrived in Oakland in 2009, fresh out of getting a BA in urban studies. I grew up in New England, where I now live again, back in my hometown. But I did not arrive in Oakland in order to study the city or to do a PhD, certainly to write a book about the city or anything like that. I came to Oakland for a combination of reasons. One of them was that my college girlfriend was like, I've had it with New England, like I'm going to Oakland. And I was like, can I come? You know? And the other one was that it just, all of the cultural and political movements that kind of reverberated outward from the West Coast, and from the Bay Area in particular, that reached me at that time, it was just like, it just hit, you know, everything that really stirred my soul. I was like, where did that come from? It's like, the Bay, Oakland, you know, and so I just felt this kind of calling that I know many people do. And eventually I did start this PhD program in the geography department at UC Berkeley. But when I wasn't spending time on campus, I found myself getting drawn further and further into the cultural lifeblood of the city. I'm a lifelong dancer. I've been a DJ for probably almost 15 years now, but that started kind of early on in my time in Oakland. And it's like there was these two schisms in my life where like I'm over here at Berkeley, I'm supposed to be coming up with some kind of project, thinking about the politics of urban space, thinking about things like race and property and policing. And then on the weekends, it's like I'm DJing parties. I'm dancing at the Malanga Caskillard Center for the Arts. I'm dancing with Samba Funk at Oakland Carnival or something like that. I'm curating public events at the Matatu Festival of Stories, which folks who've been around for a little while may remember from that time period. And at some point, I was just like, I'm done with this false binary between what I study and my kind of commitment to the long-standing Afro-diasporic cultures of this place. And at some point, I said, you know, these two things have to come together. So I committed myself in that moment to using the kind of time and resource and attention and archive that was available to me by virtue of the privilege of being at this university to help try to make sense of what I was hearing from all the artists and cultural activists who I was connected to through my quote-unquote extracurriculars. And you know, what became so amazing from that time was like, there was a lot going on in the city at that time. And you know, if you can recall or if you were here, it's like the pressure around displacement ramped up so much during the 2010s, in kind of the post-foreclosure crisis period. And there was a lot of organizing around keeping people in their homes and making that affordable. There was also a lot of organizing around preserving cultural spaces, protecting cultural organizations that were losing access to those spaces, were having noise complaints made against them, preserving public culture when there was a kind of issues around policing of park space, of the street corner, of Lake Merritt, things like that. And that felt to me like the struggle at the time. And in spending time with folks and starting to try to learn from them and learn with them, people started talking about all these things that had happened before I got here. Being like, oh, this shit is just like Festival at the Lake, or this is just like Carrie Jama Caribbean Festival. Or, you know, depend on how old they are, how many of these reverberations they could remember. But what struck me was precisely the reverberation, the sense that these dynamics have been in play for a very long time.
In a loop.
In the loop, if you will. The dissertation, the metaphor in the dissertation was reverberation. That's a very hard word to say. That's part of why the title of the book shifted on loop, but that's kind of insider baseball backstory. The last thing I'll say on it is that, so in the moment of weaving these things together, I wanted to go and look deeper. So I started to find, where are the archives where I can find out like what was really going on around some of these nightclubs that were really important spaces of belonging and that started to close down. So I started going to the Oakland History Center, to the Oakland Tribune archives, looking at old East Bay Express articles, started going even deeper, started going, finding the oral histories, started doing such an annoying number of public records requests. Like, God bless the civil servants of the city of Oakland who responded to all those public records requests. And I kind of took it on as my project to try to not to tell anybody, especially if they are a lifelong Black Oaklander, something that they do not already know. I do not see that as my role. I saw it as my role to help to kind of uplift these stories and connect a lot of dots, right? Because when you start looking at it in a big enough of a frame, as I felt like I had, again, the privilege to do by virtue of this program, that's when the repetition, the loop started to become available, and that's really the story that I wanted to tell.
That's nicely framed. And what you spend a lot of time doing is framing. And that was one of the things that struck me, that you, in a fluid way, move from a discussion of the structures of economic inequality to the lived experience and the way people fill the empty space in their lives that is created. And so you can flow from vernacular to legalese and things like that. And I envy you reading that, because when I was writing, for the most part, I stayed at the ground level. What are the aesthetics of the craft? What are the motivations of the artist and things like that? I said, can I enter into how the contracts were written and what let me just stay where I am. And so you claim a lot of lanes, okay? And it felt organic. I don't know if you had to really work with it, okay? I don't know. It seems like we're getting somebody who inhabited Oakland in an organic way. And in Oakland, you mentioned false binaries. Oakland is where false binaries come to be destroyed.
Thank God for that.
Yeah. And so you got through, you went through that in a way that was, I felt, loving. It was, you know, you got that. Oakland gave that to you. And I don't know if I'm reading too much into it, but a lot of what you say in various chapters is how much you wanted to give back. Because one thing that happens in Oakland, if you guys are from this area, you know people, they come, they take, and they leave. And some of that's magnificent. Every town has the hero, the artist that arrives and goes to Hollywood or goes to New York, etc. But there's something extra about Oakland, and you captured a whole lot of that extra. Where did it come from that you wanted to basically balance it, give back as much as you were extracting from the history?
Yeah, well, that just feels like an ethical imperative to me. I guess it probably comes from my parents. Some of the people in the room actually know my parents, but it's just that just feels like it's in my ethics, my upbringing. And yeah, I mean, like, I came into this space very conscious of my positionality, right? Arriving in 2009, right on the heels of that foreclosure crisis, both being drawn in and also understanding the structural violence that made it possible for me to be here at the same time. So just figuring out like, what is the good way through that. I don't think there's any perfect answer. I'm sure I didn't do it perfectly. The book is not going to be a perfect reflection of that, but just always trying, to do my best and kind of fail forward. But I will say one of the things that I learned, in some ways I feel like another thing that Oakland gifted me so much. But I feel like another thing that Oakland gifted me was a sense to be like, look, you're coming in with all these insecurities, you're really in your head about like what's your goal, what's your place, and it's like we just need people to show up. We just need people to I'm thinking about some of my dance teachers being like, I'm here every week. I just want to I want students who care. Okay, so it started with that, and it's like, I'm doing this event, I need someone to come set up the chairs. It's like, well, I can set up chairs, And it just kind of felt like always saying yes to the request. It's like not some huge, dramatic, revolutionary act of solidarity, though I'm here for it if someone shows me a clear way to get involved. It's like the small gestures of kindness and commitment and dedication. That really felt like kind of my way, and I think that Oakland is a place where I learned that. But I also wanted to say something about what you mentioned earlier in terms of occupying several lanes. Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like I really wanted this. I felt actually no choice but for this project to be authentic to the multiplicity of who I am. And what that has meant for me is that I've kind of got this wonky, nerdy urban studies and planning background. That's kind of my training. But I also have this deep love and affinity for dance music. And it's like, well, what's the project that brings those two things together? And I think that what you're saying is I think it's kind of a point about methods and archives. And so memories, and so I was really trying to braid, or in the way of the DJ, actually kind of mix those things together. And so that meant being with the kind of cultural grassroots, and there's ways in which that shows up in the book, but also at the same time, not feeling like that's not the story alone. There's also the ways in which the structure of this city has for decades met the everyday cultural practices, and in my case, what I'm interested in is sonic practice, right? It's there are actually many laws and structures and regulations that are put in place precisely in order to kind of control the kind of time, place, and manner in which sounds are produced, how far they reach, who they impact, is it permitted, is it not? In some cases, which we could get into if you want to, specifically, the city will ask you what genre of music is being played. What's that about? You know what I mean? So it just,
It's not like they want to know what beats you're using because they want to sample.
No. I've never seen a question on a permit application about what BPM, what's your BPM pocket going to be at the party, but that would be interesting. But, so just to say that I felt like there was something kind of weird in my positionality, in the multiple parts of my personality, where I was trying to read these things together, and that's been one of my objectives in writing this book.
A lot of us are doing that on a daily basis, and it's just how and where do you project it?
Mm-hmm.
How do you fit it in? I'm not going to talk about myself, but I'm on the radio talking about the music, and yet there's world events, there's current events, there's local events that need to be woven into the presentation. And because Oakland is where false binaries are destroyed, you're weaving a lot. And that's okay here, not everywhere, but it's okay here to do that. And you do a great job. Now, I wanted to get into what you were saying about policing the expression and going all the way back to 7th Street, all the way back to the soul groups. I remember James Brown was banned from performing in Oakland because of the destruction that happened. I was like, wait, that's not allowed. That's karmically not allowed. But that's what's going on. And you talk about it. and you reach out. One of the things you didn't say that in terms of what you did was you went from the archive to reaching out to the people, and you interviewed a lot of the players, the folks that are running venues and trying to manage events and really be a custodian of the culture, and you dealt with a lot of their hardships, and the parallels were, they were illuminating and exciting and distressing to see that they were so constant. Okay? And if you're an activist, you're like, well, okay, well, there's a point where you can intervene. Well, damn, the same thing happened 10 years ago. Well, then the same thing happened. Well, then the same thing happened. And you talk about two things that are happening. There's regulation on the music, and then you got into the Black Panthers, and you got into Lionel Wilson in terms of having a black civic infrastructure and sort of transcending the Republican right-wing machine that was here. But the upshot seemed to be, and maybe you came to this conclusion, it didn't matter who was in office, that regulation of the soundscape was going to continue. Can you kind of touch on that?
There's so much that I want to respond to there, but okay. Let me respond to that, and then if it makes sense later, what you said about like that kind of pessimism about repetition is something I would love to be able to speak to also, and I think it really gets at why I named this book on loop. So maybe we'll loop back to it. But yeah, I will say that that was one of the things that was really striking for me in doing this research is not just coming to learn for myself that that the kind of stigma and policing around kind of street-level black sonic practice was something that looped from one decade to the next, one kind of era to the next. Not just that, but actually that a lot of the regulations that are still on the books now and that really kind of burst into public consciousness during the time in which I was here and was working on this book because of some very high-profile incidents that folks may remember, like the kind of noise, not only a noise complaint, kind of the violent intervention upon a samba funk drum circle that happened at the lake in 2015, the Barbecue Becky incident in 2018. It kind of put a spotlight on these things like, wait, what? You need a permit to drum? You need a permit to have a barbecue, or the city tells you where you can have your barbecue or what kind? I actually went and found that a lot of those ordinances were actually installed for the first time in the late 1970s, kind of coinciding right with when Lionel Wilson became Oakland's first black mayor and inaugurated this kind of 20-year period of kind of BIPOC political leadership, but especially with a lot of black leadership and black mayors in particular. And I tried to figure out, like, well, what, how to make sense of that, And I think I've come to certain different kinds of conclusions about that for myself. One of them is that I feel like a particular kind of white cultural norms are sort of embedded within the legal and governmental tools that are available to city leaders. And there was a kind of a very meaningful, very important taking over of the municipality, right? After years and years, in the book I call it basically like, we know black power in Oakland, but I say like this whole period of white political rule before that, I call that white power. Like that was the white power city before, before the black power revolt in the 60s and 70s. So it was very meaningful to kind of like take that over, but at the same time, what folks had to work with was the same kinds of laws and regulations. Something I write about a lot in the book is about this idea of nuisance, this kind of legal concept or category of nuisance, which became increasingly important, ironically, in the 70s and 80s. So I think that's part of it, being like, it's a little bit of like a, master's tools kind of argument. But on the other hand, one thing I think is really interesting about the post-civil rights era in Oakland, and I think it's happened in other cities that had a similar trajectory, was that with black leadership in the city, and with the passage of certain civil rights policies that were going to outlaw that kind of overt, like monolithic anti-black like discrimination. It's like, okay, so then we all know the discrimination continued, but the question is under what guise? And what I argue in the book is that the idea of nuisance, of kind of restoring the quality of life in this very difficult chapter of the city, right? We're talking about disinvestment, Prop 13, eventually the crack epidemic, like, do not diminish as a very difficult chapter. People were dealing with real challenges and trying to figure out what do we do about it. But in that moment, some of these tools around kind of like quality of life policing strategies, anti-nuisance policies, they became things that, like, you know, in effect ended up kind of targeting, especially young black people's cultural practices and their presence in public space, but they passed muster with anti-discrimination laws. Because they're not targeting people on account of their race, not overtly. They're targeting them on account of, you made too much noise. You spray painted graffiti on that wall.
How do you regulate rhythm in population? Talk about how many beats per minute.
Well, the noise ordinance actually defines, the noise ordinance defines what's a nuisance. And one of the qualities is that it is repetitive. So I really go in on that in the book, being like, let's talk about the Eurocentric attitude that has around music, around what defines music, being like strategic creative use of repetition. Repetition as a kind of ritual technology is like essential to many different forms of Afro-diasporic music, but that's just in the code. So yes, they also regulate rhythm.
And they have to, because this place will always be explosive with rhythm.
Mm-hmm.
Because folks come out here to be liberated.
Mm-hmm.
And, we sort of see the infinite coastline and we kind of wake up to infinity every day. So let's go back to what you wanted to talk about.
The loop there. Yeah. Okay, so I love a double entendre. So on the name en loop is it's trying to do multiple things, right? And on the one hand, it is talking about the repetitiveness of these kind of anti-black structures, which we've been talking about so far. But on the other hand, like I was just saying about, Afro-diasporic emphasis on kind of repetition as like an intentional creative strategy, that's the other invocation of looping here, right? Talking about, and in the section I read earlier, whether it's talking about spinning donuts, or a dance cipher, or sampling music to make a hip-hop beat, or DJ mixing, or all of these various, or call and response, or the gospel vamp, or like all of these forms of black sonic production, that looping is an essential part of the kind of spiritual, the spirituality of it, and also like looping as a freedom practice. So I'm trying to hold both of those things simultaneously in this book, to say that like repetition is not, we have to like deal with repetition. We want to like think about how to intervene upon the future of this city to make sure that it becomes more pro-black. Like we need to deal with that repetition. And it actually, that the music itself and the use of looping within these kinds of music and movement practices, that's one of the ways that people are already dealing with it. And so it's a little bit of a both-and thing, and it inspires me to read actually the very last paragraph of the book, lest you walk out of here thinking that I think like, it's always just going to be like this, it's just going to loop one loop after another. Let me find it. Okay. Ultimately, thinking, acting, and moving in time with black dance music requires us to listen for the loops, layers, and echoes that live within the deep grooves of America's racist order and anti-racist black geographies. In contrast to linear theories, stories, and song structures, it calls for us to rethink struggles over urban space in terms of what the hip-hop scholar Trisha Rose calls the dance of, quote, repetition and rupture. The notion of time as an arrow provides a view of the present that is too narrow to grasp the historically entrenched nature of racism and the extent of the work needed to repair it. But by the same token, the notion of time as a never-ending loop is too mechanistic to recognize the ever-present potential for escape. In between these two ends of the pendulum, black dance music insists that in the loop there lives always the prospect for improvisation, transformation, and transcendence.
Those are the last lines?
Last lines. Spoiler alert.
It makes me think of syncopation, because just every drummer kind of knows that time stands still, but time's in motion when you drum. And there's the expectation, and then there's the variation. And you kind of have to be a master of both. Were you going to say something? Oh.
No.
Okay.
I want to hear where you're going.
I just, I keep thinking of King Theo from Samba Funk as sort of the guy for this, because I worked with him. You got lessons from him that make a lot of sense. But there's a lot of folks that write about Afro-diasporic music, and they come at it from a different starting point, but you captured it, and you kind of laced it into this, so it's a beautiful thing. I wanted to ask you about one specific thing, and that is Lake Merritt. It seems like Oakland is like a bicycle wheel that spins, and Lake Merritt's the hub of the thing. And you would walk around like, all these things sort of spring out from what's going on there. Just give me your take on, and you compare it to like Golden Gate Park and Central Park as these enormous artifices, and then this thing just sort of organically happened as a hub. But I don't know.
Sitting here next to you and thinking about Lake Merritt, I'm like, I didn't describe it this way in the book, but I'm like, wow, Lake Merritt is funky, isn't it? Even just on a olfactory level, but yeah. Okay, I want to say one thing quickly, and then I want to answer your question, which is that I feel like it's important to say, like, almost like as a disclaimer from the outset, like, this actually is not really a music history book. Like, it would be easy to come away from this thinking like, oh, cool, it's like a music history book. I want to go read, I'm going to go learn about Oakland black music history. And there is a lot of that. There's a lot in there. There's definitely, for an urban studies book, there's a lot in there. But again, like, my training is in urban studies, and I felt like what speaking to different audiences. So there is a part of this that is also kind of speaking to these like hyper-divided academic fields, and the kind of intervention in that space is to say that urban studies needs to take black dance music more seriously. So this is like an urban studies, it's kind of an urban studies book, kind of an urban history of Oakland that is really trying to center the sounds of black dance music, the time technologies that are woven into black dance music, the kind of energy field that emerges from it, and the ways that actually politics come to revolve around it in ways I don't think get appreciated enough. But it just feels important to say that, like, this is kind of what happens when an urban studies person who has a deep but amateurish sort of love for the music tries to figure out how do we like hold all these things together. So Lake Merritt, I think the thing I want to say about Lake Merritt that was so fascinating for me, and this comes up in chapter 7, which is called Before Barbecue Becky, a prehistory of, what is it called? Before Barbecue Becky, a prehistory of, what is it called? It's a prehistory is what it is. Oh, that was the dissertation title. Sorry, it's called Before Barbecue Becky on Loop at Lake Merritt. When that happened, the dominant response that I saw was like, this is like the sign that gentrification in Oakland has reached its pinnacle. It is like the death knell of a certain kind of black cultural presence at the lake. And while I think on one hand that was true, it happened after I had basically like finished my dissertation research, and I was like, well, wait a second. I was just in the archives learning all about stuff that happened at the east side of the lake in the 80s and the 90s, and stuff that happened in Lakeside Park in the 70s, and like that starts to sound a whole lot more like an echo than an exception, right? And so that's what the purpose of that chapter is, to kind of start in what was then the present and then move backwards and be like, this is actually building from a long history of regulation and struggle and pushback that honestly began a long time before gentrification came to Oakland. So I think there's something really interesting there that I'd love to talk about with people. But getting down into the specifics of it, what was so fascinating to me is that, like, you know, where Onsayo Abram and Kenzie Smith were when Jennifer Schulte called the police on them, like, that is a place where younger black people would come on Sundays for the cruise in the 1980s and 90s. I mean, we're talking about literally the same exact patch of grass, you know. Or I started doing research into Festival at the Lake, and basically there was like a police riot at Festival at the Lake. I think it was either 94 or 95. I come to learn that there's a deep echo in that to another incident that happened, I think in 1976, where, again, in the exact same place, and this is kind of interesting to think about kind of the prehistory of the sideshow also, in the exact same place, two black brothers from Richmond were accosted by the Oakland Police Department because they were just kind of driving around Lakeside Park and one of them was hanging out on the roof. And so it's like, it's not just that things keep happening in some of the same ways. They're often, and the lake really exemplifies this, they're often happening in the exact same sites. And that just felt so deep to me. I just could not but write about it.
Because things are always in formation right here. The lake is right there. And I always think of this building. I think about the Oakland courthouse where all the Panther protests were.
The auditorium.
And the Kaiser conventions. Yeah, the auditorium. And all the commerce on the other side. And it's just how people live where they live and they make it theirs. And then somebody feels like it must be regulated. These people are too liberated. Something has to be done. So I want to thank you for laying out so much of this phenomenon, really, of black life and sort of white attempts to control it. Okay? Not everybody really wants to go there.
Can I thank you for something? Because, you know, this no project exists in isolation, but this would never have come to be without so many points of inspiration. And your work in party music about the Lumpin', the kind of soul band made up of rank and file Black Panther members, was so hugely influential for me because in terms of kind of smashing those false binaries, I really felt like that was the first book that I had ever read that was taking very seriously the role of music and cultural politics. They're saying that there was like not a division between the kind of cultural politics that the Panthers were engaged in and the like social service programs and the more militant forms of struggle also. And maybe you probably were standing on other people's shoulders also. Like I'm sure some people were talking about those things, but I think that what I love the most about party music is that it's not just being like, yes, there are many people who have rightfully acknowledged the fact that like a lot of black popular musicians became very politicized during that period. Maybe wrote message music or got involved in some ways, sometimes in kind of tense ways with the Black Panther Party or things like that, and that there was a kind of aesthetics to Black Power. I mean, plenty of people have noted that, but you just like situated it all in one very particular place that matters a lot to me. Being like really showing how, not just like how these things were circulating in the national arena, but like how they were all happening right here within the neighborhood, right within the apparatus of the Oakland chapter of the party. And that just kind of blew my mind. And so, thank you. I just want to say thank you.
All of these folks were running up against respectability politics.
Yes.
And even when you talk about revolutionaries, there was this kind of mythic archetype of this stoic revolutionary that doesn't get down and funky. And I remember even interviewing with them. I wasn't an entertainer, I was a panther, I was a revolution. I had to go back to them again. Well, what were you wearing? It looks like you had those puffy shirts like the Temptations. I was, okay, well, we did make those. Yeah, we did do the dance stuff, but I was a revolution. You know, the fact that they were living both ways, if you will, they still felt like there was this construction of who they were and who they were supposed to be, even though here people just do what they do. And your book really touches a whole lot on the conundrum of respectability politics throughout the thing. And it's kind of somebody else's task to kind of unpack a lot of that. You know, touching on Ishmael Reed getting sick of the noise in this town that he writes so much about. I was hoping you weren't going to mention that in public, Rickey. But there's, I'll go from that and just say, I still remember the day Don Cornelius on Soul Train had Curtis Blow on there. And he reluctantly, you know, let these rappers on. And he, you know, if you ever watched an interview with Don Cornelius with an entertainer, it's an event in itself. And the first thing he said was, you know, I never did like your music. And Curtis Blow to this day talks about how that destroyed him. He left the industry basically because of that. But that's what the previous generation was clinging. They were clinging to some, you know, notion of accomplishment, respectability that is embedded in abandoning the blues, abandoning that which is not bourgeois. It was just incredible. And a lot of that's baked into this. And one could write a dissertation from your dissertation. I mean, maybe so, honestly. Yeah, I'm like so excited to just see how people react to this, you know, in whatever ways feel true to them. Maybe so, yeah. What do we got? We're over, yeah. There's time for questions. Oh, thank you. Go for it, folks. Yeah, you back? So, I think when I was thinking when I got here and how you said it, what and how respectability politics plays a part in, especially when you look at Lionel Wilson and all the black mayors. We have multiple black mayors. And what's the relationship that black mayors have with hip-hop? And look at it now compared to now where you see rappers like Mr. Fab and all these rappers now are getting love and now are being used. Even you have Sideshow Burgers, Hyphy Burger. You every single time you think about Oakland, you see a Sideshow. There's literally I've never seen anytime I've seen a Sideshow. No, guilty, yeah. And even also have you talked to the people on the board not board, I mean Parks and Rec board, because I had a conversation with Isaac Reed and he said he'll shoot people who was playing loud music. He was a former member of it. And Isaac Reed, you know, who's the Koch Reader, whoever y'all know who he is. But yeah, I remember him saying that to me because I went on the call. And I was during the time after they've been complaining about the lake and all the noise over the lake and how they put bills over the lake. And I came there saying that's racist. And he was like, well, what would you do? And I don't like it, I'll go there and shoot somebody. So do you think that keeps on playing out because it's obsession with respectability politics, but also this idea that noise is separate from discriminatory practices toward black people? I mean, I think you hit on something really important there. There's something in the idea of noise that, and I also get it. Like, people have a very visceral reaction to sounds that feel like they have no control over and it's coming from outside of them. I do understand that, but I think because of that, it's kind of like people can't recognize the violence and the kind of thing that you're talking about because it seems like, well, once it's tagged as noisy, then like it has no place here. And it's like, okay, I understand that, but like let's look at the long history of how, honestly, even the idea of, within white supremacy, how the idea of music or like beautiful sound is always constructed against this otherized noise, which again, within white supremacy it's like associating blackness with noise. So it's just really complex.
right? And it just feels like to not take that seriously just because somebody woke you up at 1 in the morning, which I get is annoying. It's just like, I just feel like I'm trying to like broaden the conversation to open it up a little bit more. In terms of the respectability politics thing, I think that this issue of age and generation to generation is really, really big, you know, because I think what I hope you come away with if you read this book is like, yeah, for the Black Oaklanders who arrived as a part of the Second Great Migration in World War II, it's like their accents, their manner of sounding in public, their blues music was a huge part of how not only the white establishment, the kind of white Republican machine, but also more like pre-war, long-standing black residents, maybe more middle-class black residents, also reacted to like kind of country kin and being like, whoa, you know. So at that time, blues music was disreputable, right? And now you have this moment now where it's like, again, for very good reason, there's the elder generation, the survivors from that time, really trying to uphold and preserve the legacy of Oakland blues, and may feel like Hyphy is totally disreputable, right? But like it's like what's the young thing at any given moment in time? And I feel like the way it gets tagged as respectable or disreputable is really important. And I think for me, what's so interesting about, there's so many things that are so interesting about the Hyphy movement, but one of them is that, and this is not the only, I think, form of musical expression, black or otherwise, where this is true, but I feel like that was really a moment where it was like, the participants in the movement were like, oh, you think we're unruly? You think we're disreputable? Like, we're going to turn that actually into our aesthetic, right? So like, at a certain point, that kind of otherization, like, and the oppression that comes along with it, like, at a certain point, it starts to actually feed the thing that people fear. Dorothy, did you have a question?
I did. Well, mostly I had a comment. I was looking at your book maybe from a different perspective than someone else. I don't know. But because of my time in the history room where I had at my hand so many different kinds of Oakland narratives, historical narratives, and I really want to commend you for pulling out a really unique way to tell the story of Oakland. Excuse me, because buried underneath all of those stories, you know, what I often told people coming to the history room during my time there was, there are a lot of histories of Oakland. Excuse me, some focus on, thank you, some focus on, you know, Panther history, some focus on World War II, others focus on, you know, the settling of Oakland, where black people don't show up much at all in those early narratives. But they're very segregated stories, where I'm just going to focus on this time period, or these kinds of people, or this particular company, or something like that. And underneath all of those histories, which are valid in their way, because they do not only tell the story the writer's telling, but they're telling the story about how a story about Oakland is told. Underneath all of that was a story about the sonic landscape, which I'm so glad you kind of unearthed that and kind of pulled that up into the light. I'm really enjoying the book. I haven't finished it.
Thank you.
And I'm so proud of you.
Oh, thank you.
And so, like a good auntie. And so, I think it's really important, and I kind of struggled with this when people would come and say, I want to write the story about Oakland. And I'd always have what we call a reference interview with them about, well, what do you want to say, and how do you want to say it, and how do you want to frame it, and who is it for, and who do you think your audience is going to be? I just thought this was a really unique way to tell the story of Oakland, but as Rickey said, there's so many stories embedded in this story. And then I also want to encourage you to think of this as kind of like a sourdough starter. You know, because somebody's going to come and build on this story that you've introduced us to. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Vanessa.
I can't resist. I don't know if people in this room know that Alex contributed to the cultural plan for the city of Oakland, Mall in Oakland. He did the economic study of the sector, the cultural sector in Oakland for that plan.
And the asset map.
And the asset map, thank you. Yes, and you GIS expert. So I want to ask this question kind of in that context. Mayor Lee is very interested in, how to activate the cultural sector within her administration. Like, she is trying to make connections and I believe values the sector. But I think there's a little bit of not exactly knowing how to connect the dots. I think there's a lot of well-meaning people in different departments who are open, but not necessarily knowing the way. So I would say if you could say something to the mayor about how to think, or whatever. I don't mean to make it so pressured, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Yeah. So, and this is Vanessa Wang and Roberto Bedoya. Roberto's the former cultural affairs manager for Oakland, and Vanessa is. Are you still on the Cultural Affairs Commission?
Yeah.
Yeah, and also just a brilliant person involved in the cultural sector of cities for a long time. The three of us worked together on the plan that she was referring to before. I think what I want to say to that is honestly the same thing I was trying to argue about with you two back in 2018, which is how do we define the cultural sector in the first place? It's like it is one thing to try to shore up the performing arts venues, the Oakland Museum, the white wall galleries and those kinds of things, right? But like in doing this work and just given my kind of commitments to the sonic spaces, to the spaces where dancing happens, it's like does that get included in the cultural sector or not? Like, does a nightclub get included as part of the cultural sector? Does a bar that just has a DJ sometimes get included? Do the sometimes, kind of unsanctioned parties that happen at the lake, do those get included? Because I think that they really absolutely contribute to the cultural lifeblood of the city, but in a lot of ways, there are spaces where cultural expression and cultural production happen that are hard, sorry about that, where they're just kind of suspect in the eyes of governance. They're seen as more like, that's something that actually that the police department deals with, not cultural affairs. And sound, because of the way that it meets city government in terms of noise ordinances, sometimes it's located in the planning department, sometimes it's located in the police department. That means that it's permitting and things like that. It means that it's like, that's the place, that's where the rub happens between the cultural sector and the city when it comes to something like dance music. And that's going to be really, really different than if we're talking about just strictly trying to make grants to very, very important community-based art organizations, or muraling, or something like that. You know what I mean?
I have to say this because the people are residents of Oakland. There's something called the general plan that's going on right now that is a blueprint for the next 20 years of policy in the city of Oakland, and one of the elements is called noise. And that element is up in this phase of the plan right now.
How is it?
It is. So I'm just going to say, if you see meetings from the Planning Bureau of the Planning and Building about the general plan, pay attention.
Thank you, Vanessa. Did you have your hand up back there?
Yeah.
And I think we might want to make this the last question, and then I'll be in the back. We can talk to people more if they want to come buy books, sign books, or even just chat. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. I have not read your book, but it just sounds really interesting. I was wondering if you could speak more to even dances and music back from even further beyond the soul repair. So thinking about 7th Street, so many great clubs like Orbit Room, Slim Jenkins, that were destroyed essentially, and all that history through that, and also through a lot of the taxational places that had dances. So I was thinking about was there any connections you made between the literal gentrification and destruction of these places, and also how that affected not just the music, but the dances, life, the
Oh, I see what you
were
mean.
also culturally gentrified down like a parallel path.
I have not thought about that question as much as I've thought about some of the other questions, but let me sit with that for just a minute. I think what comes up for me is that oh, hey, welcome. I'm really curious about, I think it is worth paying attention to the physical spaces in which social dancing is innovated and the way in which it evolves. And I hear what you're saying in terms of the 7th Street Blues Clubs as being a place for a certain kind of dance production to happen at that time. So again, that's not something that I got super deep into in the book, but I was just talking to my good friend Spencer Wilkinson, who's sitting just here left, and Spencer's been working for years on an amazing documentary about kind of funk dance forms that emerged out of the Bay Area in the 60s and 70s, so the boogaloo in Oakland, roboting in Richmond, and strutting in San Francisco. And we were just talking earlier today about like how important talent shows were to the development of that form. And he showed me a little clip of the movie, and I was like, where are the talent shows at today? Like, what is the equivalent of that? It just makes me think about how important it is for these kinds of spaces where people can show up, they can learn from one another, they can imitate one another, they can compete with one another, and like, yeah, I mean, Spencer was like, yeah, it probably all circulates on TikTok, and like that's probably true, right? But there is something to be said about physical spaces, yeah, where you're actually like you're rubbing up against each other, you're like honestly smelling each other, like you're you can build friendships or frenemyships or whatever what comes out of that. And feeling like, there are so many reasons why I think this attentiveness to physical spaces to come together around dance music matter. This is maybe just one of them, but if I could leave you with anything, is being like, yeah, these physical spaces really, really matter. So what are we all going to do together to make sure that the kind of violence of the past, which has taken so many different forms, honestly, it's another thing I came away from this book, whether that is wholesale destruction, like knocking something over with a tank, putting the BART line or a freeway through a neighborhood, or honestly way more subtle things. Read chapter 6, way more subtle things around being like, oh, you want to have too short at your club? Like, you're going to need to pay the Oakland Police Department $8,000 for an overtime pay, so we can put officers out on the street to kind of harass and intimidate your patrons. Like, there's so many different things that have led to the foreclosure of these spaces, and like, so what are we all going to do so that that doesn't continue going forward? Thank you all so much.
Wow.
Thank you.
I have one last question, Alex. This is not a hard one. I just wanted to know, what is your DJ name?
Oh. I go by DJ Sasha. Sasha, people may know, may not know, is a kind of a loving kind of nickname for Alexander in Russian. And so I go by DJ Sasha. Yeah. You can look me up on Instagram as well. I'm at Sounding Sasha.
If folks are interested, the funk book was just been translated into Russian. You can buy it online.
If you know any Sashas, any other funky Sashas, yeah. All right, I'm going to migrate to the back, and I hope to be able to take notes.